Once more, we jump into an era of furry fandom. For the first time, we are finally moving forward and not backward. The early 2000s were a difficult period for the fandom. However, furry was finally beginning to evolve into more of what we see in the modern day. Unfortunately, it was also home to some of the most disastrous events that would forever taint the public perception of furry fandom. Today we're going to talk about how exactly furries got the reputation it did with the general public. Hello Furs from the web, my name is Scar, and this is the story of furries versus the media. Stay tuned. Furry grew out of the sci-fi and comic book fandoms in the 80s. Over the 90s, it featured a renaissance that shaped the fandom into its own form. Furry as a fandom is always evolving, and while the 2000s would bring their own massive changes, especially in the online community, things did not begin without a hitch. There was a large sense of freedom once furry first broke away into its own community, and in many ways those translated into the first conventions. I do plan on remaking my conference video after New Year's, but a lot of the information I presented in that video does still hold true. The atmosphere at conventions in the early days of the fandom was a stark contrast to what we see now, as was the broader fandom. The attitudes to the public and media in the early days were teeming with ignorance. Whether due to the newfound freedom or other reasons, this attitude would come to bite the fandom in the butt later. It took a couple of years before furry would receive its first real media coverage, which at the beginning were mostly for the human interest story. Sci-Fi's coverage of Conference 4 was positive, all things considered, and showcased highlights of the convention back in 1993.
Yoo-hoo! How you doing? Suzanne Hyman is here, one of our Sci-Fi Buzz producers, fresh back from ConFurence 4. Now, why the fur there? What's that fur?
That's for furry fandom.
Mm-hmm.
It was an anthropomorphic animation festival.
What the heck is that?
Oh, I thought you'd ask that. That is when you ascribe human traits and characteristics to an animal.
Oh.
Kind of like.
Well, like this picture here. Oh, is that Dan Rather? Oh, that's you!
Very good, Mike.
Nicely done.
They would also go on to cover Conference East, the short-lived unaffiliated brother convention in Ohio in 1996. The good press coverage was very short-lived, and while the attitudes and atmosphere of the early fandom may have had something to do with it, it was far from the only cause of what lied ahead. By the time the internet rolled around, tabloid sensationalist media was something that had been around for a few decades. When the internet hit households in force during the late 90s and early 2000s, information became much more widely available. Media also had an entire new platform, one that was easier to step into compared to a television spot, and further reaching than the radio. There was also a breadth of competition that would continue to grow, with each news company trying to outdo the other with the headlines. Furries were not the first to become the joke of the media, and we were certainly far from the last. Whether it was the outcasting of anime fans, or the long-standing war on video games, some media corporations will always be willing to twist narratives in order to capture a bigger audience. The influence of the internet just further propagated this. This is the other major hand in why furry got treated the way it did. Sometimes looking from the inside out, it can be hard to remember that while furry arguably got the worst for its small size, it was far from the only thing the media had twisted during those big years. The actual problem is, from those who are looking from the outside in, the realization of this never even seemed to cross their mind. Like the sci-fi coverage of Conference, there was a couple harmless fluff pieces done on the fandom. Sure, none of them were perfect, but they were respectful all things considered. This was until Kare 11 News reported on the infamous Conference 8. Conference 8 was a sore spot for the convention, and involved a good number of rumors and controversies. Combined with the early atmosphere with events like the pet auction, which at first glance can easily be mistaken for something illegal, and the Cabaret for Le Dance, which is accurately described as a furry strip club. When Kare 11 showed up, they did not hold back.
Look, if you're trying to figure out what these people are doing, stick around for the extra. It's unlike anything you've ever seen before.
I'm Paul Majors. Coming up next, they call themselves furries, and one could live next door to you. Tonight, enter their bizarre world. It's a trip you won't soon forget.
Many of those attending the conference here told us that being furry is just innocent child's play. Adults pretending to be kids. But a lot of what goes on here is undeniably adult-oriented, and it's not for everyone.
Anyways, opening bid, $2.
At the pet auction, for instance, furries bid for back rubs. $17.50. And other pet services.
The motives that are involved in many different areas would tend to be a little bit controversial. I don't really go in that direction.
And the furry strip show is definitely not kid stuff.
While adult events do occasionally happen at modern conventions, it is extremely rare for an official event to reach this kind of level. The worst you'll see in the schedule these days is Cards Against Humanity.
So we can get through all the cards? I went from
an erotic and paranoid rabbit
to
Dial M for murder.
And couldn't have done it without
baby furs.
Okay. This is a furry deck. I went from
another goddamn introduction post
to
trying to run a furry convention
and couldn't have done it without
a thieving raccoon.
Okay, I think I love this deck. Huscoon, I went from
Pervert
to
horny as fuck
and couldn't have done it without
Califer.
Oh shit, dog!
Take a picture of that and want to tweet it at him.
Or adult artwork, which isn't out of the norm for most conventions. And if you are looking, it's not like somebody's going to hand you a black card simply for asking. Unfortunately, the first coverage of furry's adult aspects sparked a real chain of coverage for the late 90s. In October of 97, WSVN TV News published a long TV segment featuring interviews from a couple of Florida furries. While the video has been lost to time, a quote taken from the Press for website reads, "Tonight, you're going to meet people that really believe in their heart of hearts that they are animals, so they dress like animals. This is no joke." From this we understand that there was some level of misinformation in it. Furries believing they're animals is one of the largest misconceptions the fandom would be faced with. That same month, Creature Comforts was published by Mary Claire. Reading the hook line, "Mark thinks he's a honey badger. Rod wants to be an otter, and Lori the lioness likes lapping up cream and walking on ledges. Welcome to the weird world of furries, the Americans who love animals so much, they want to be them." Again, furries thinking they are animals. The article went on to talk about fursonas, and almost exclusively talked about the erotic and weird sides of the fandom. I'm willing to give the furries interviewed the benefit of the doubt, but these articles paint an image of a fetish-oriented fandom that just simply wasn't the case. And some of the quotes further propagated this. The train just continued. Heavy Petting in Loaded magazine, March of 1998. Considered by some, and myself, to be the most infamous coverage of the fandom, which featured interviews of zoophiles and badmouthed ConFurence even more. Again, we can look at some of the misconceptions, another big one being, all furries are zoophiles. This article even used such eye-catching quotes like, "As part of my research, I masturbated wolves and collected their semen." Quote, "I have spent 2 days in mortal fear of developing an inexplicable erection." There was a couple of middle-of-the-road press reports that weren't too bad, but none really quite represented the fandom correctly either. October 1999. Eurotrash from the UK basically spent an entire episode ridiculing the fandom in Conference 10. The next major negative press came in 2001, when Vanity Fair published the infamous Pleasures of the Fur, which focused on some of the fringe elements. After George Jurley attended MFF hoping to find some spicy material, he settled on the embarrassingly open-spoken plushophile Kenneth Foxwolfie Gallon, and a sex researcher, Catherine Gates, who spends a lot of time talking about things outside the fandom. The article isn't strictly negative, as it does talk about some of the honest aspects of the convention. The kicker this time is that the balanced tone and mainstream status of Vanity Fair led to this article reaching many more faces than the predecessors. Also, not all furries are plushophiles, kind of painting that image, and why do you need a sex researcher for a convention? The pain train for furry just chugged right on, with Sex2K's Plushies and Furries airing on MTV in January of 2002.
Wearing a fursuit can be sexually arousing.
Half of a sexual appeal for a fursuit isn't for just, someone in a costume. It's for the fursuit. The fact that you're having sex with someone who he's all furry, he's got, this furry sort of head, big ears and a muzzle and stuff. That's what half of the appeal is.
Honestly, at this point, I don't even feel like I have any more to say. I'll just show a clip.
Well, they got that right. The furry fandom did begin in the 1980s.
Furry is very complicated. It's something a little different to every person, I think.
This is accurate, if not a bit downplayed. However, I think what they failed to mention was that being furry can mean something more innocent to the individual. The only definition of fursuiters offered by the documentary has an emphasis on the adult-oriented side. And again, the point of a fursuit is not to look like a giant stuffed animal, but to become a different character.
A lot of the mainstream has gotten the idea that furry equals bestiality.
And I'm fairly sure, just in this case, that that's not the case.
Unnecessary mention of bestiality.
Hug and scratch and bounce around and have a good time.
I don't remember seeing a scritching conga line as part of the convention schedule.
Part of the furry, I really think, is sexual attraction. And anyone who says that furry is not a sexual-based fandom is really kind of fooling themselves.
I'm gonna go with no. I don't really think this is the whole story of what this guy believes, but the way the documentary presents this makes it seem like this is the case for all furry.
Despite being interspersed with some good to mixed reporting, the bad publicity surrounding the fandom was just that much more impactful. It's the same reason why you're more likely to hear about depressing events on the news rather than uplifting ones. Ask yourself what sells. Tragedy, sex, freaks, they all draw attention. Sensationalism was squeezing furries like a dried orange, just trying to get the remaining juice out. Unfortunately, the most fatal blow was still yet to be dealt. In 2003, the most infamous example of bad publicity in the fandom would be broadcasted to 25 million people. The train just kept running until it crashed into the next station. When it comes to the media's abuse of the furry fandom, there is one episode that has become the poster child. Deservingly so, as it reached far beyond what any of the others could. Of course, I'm talking about the CSI episode. Season 4, Episode 5, October 30th, 2003. Fur and Loathing aired on millions of televisions across the world. For those who aren't familiar, CSI, standing for Criminal Scene Investigations, is a fictional show about an elite team of police who specialize in forensics.
Excuse me. I'm Catherine Willows. I'm with the Crime Lab.
When it comes to the episode, the idea of an exaggerated furry convention is admittedly an intriguing plot premise, but the problem is the producers knew very well the effect the show would have on the fandom before they even started filming. In August of 2003, the producers of CSI reached out to the furry fandom directly. They got in contact with Saberfox, aka Darkfox, who is the head of the SoCal Furs Yahoo group. Initially, they were hoping to find some actual furries in Southern Cali to fill the extra roles. Saberfox, however, opened up a discussion with the producers, suggesting they might help the show more accurately describe the real fandom and give a better image than other media had. One non-disclosure agreement later, Saber and Kyle Fox received drafts of the script for review. After pointing out many of the factual errors and misconceptions within the script, they sent in their feedback with pictures of real conventions. The producers decided to closet the furries and proceed with the original script, disregarding any of the advice. Saber made many posts discussing his frustration with being stonewalled and the inevitable damage that the episode was going to cause. Only 10 local furs decided to answer the extras casting call, with the rest being overtly cautious about stepping onto the show. The vast majority of the people shown in the episode were just paid actors, including every fursuit excluding Java. Once the episode finally released, the fandom reception was universally mixed. Just about everybody agreed that it misrepresented furries and fursuiters. A couple were amused by it, and on the other hand, a couple saw it for the real trouble it would end up causing. The sour reputation of the fandom, even among many people today, is a testament to what impact the single episode of a popular show had. While attitudes at the time weren't quite the disdain many modern furries have towards the episode, I think that is just attributed to no one seeing what it would become. Job loss, bullying, and possible criminal attacks are just a few of the things members of the fandom have been faced with. Furry's evolution into the modern internet wouldn't be smooth either. Attitudes toward the media would slant further toward disdain, and they would remain that way for a very long time. As previously mentioned, while there was some frustration over the CSI episode, it wasn't super widespread in the beginning. By 2003, the media's abuse of the fandom was nothing new, and probably didn't hold the same shock value it did back in the late 90s. Once the sweeping effects of the fur and loathing appeared, however, things changed. The ignorance shifted to a straight-up anti-media attitude. Many members of the fandom, notably public figures such as the head of conventions, often did not want to talk to most media outlets. This kind of status quo led to most of the attention around the fandom either comprising of no actual involvement with the fandom, or small furries who decided to answer independently. Reasons could include being naive to the point of believing they could break through the sensationalism.
This is one of the greatest dangers we face. The eager furry who feels that this is my opportunity to save the fandom. I'm going to save all of us by giving these people the real story, and I will be a hero. No, you won't. No, there have been so many folks who have tried to take these people on. They're professionals. I'm sorry, you don't have the training to take these people on.
Or those who simply wanted to share their own definition of the fandom. More often than not, the media would twist interviews to fit their own agenda. Certain individuals even became ostracized from parts of the community. An example being Chew Fox and her partner on Tyra Banks' 2009.
And one of the couples are furries, meaning that they have sex dressed in animal costumes.
Well, we are furries. Furries are people who have an inner animal that they like to celebrate. Okay. And we celebrate it through drawing ourselves and wearing costumes and other such things.
Is it like costumes like at the amusement park? Yeah, it is. Oh my gosh. So
it is like quite similar, yes.
So it's like mascot, like you go to a football game.
We like to go out to different places and wear it. There are events that you go to with other furries, and they have dances in their costumes.
Okay, when you go to Disneyland, do you guys get turned on? No? You're not looking at Mickey Mouse going, hi, going, ooh, yeah. No?
No.
Okay, do you have sex when you have the costume on?
Yes.
After being invited for the obvious fact that they were furries, they also neglected to mention that their lifestyle did not represent the entire fandom, and they paid dearly for it. It wasn't until after the 2010s that the attitude began to change. The most famous example is Uncle Kage, the chairman of Anthrocon, who has become well known for stepping up and talking to the media. Over the years, he has managed to make the entire city of Pittsburgh very positive to the fandom, which is a real rarity for places these days.
The annual Furries convention means a lot of money yearly for the city of Pittsburgh, but the Furries are also a nonprofit. Anthrocon is a .org. Now, they don't make contributions directly, but the furry characters do hold charitable events throughout the year and raise money for different organizations. But what the Furries really mean here in Pittsburgh, they say, in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, is a place where they can be accepted without judgment, without age, or without color.
He has done great work not only fostering good connections with the media, but informing people how to deal with situations they might find themselves in. A popular reoccurring panel, Furries and the Media, has been cited by many and is still very informational for anyone who wants to learn.
Furries and the media. Let's start with the very, very basic question. Why do we need such a discussion? Well, anybody who doesn't know the answer to that question hasn't been around long, have they? Pardon me. We have had a few black eyes given to us by the media. We've had some very, very good reporting, and we've had some reporting that, shall we say, focused on aspects of the fandom that we really try to minimize. We're a collection of estimates upwards of tens of thousands of what I am very, very proud to call some of humanity's finest dreamers. We are people of boundless imagination. We are creators. Every single one of us, in his own right, is a creator. Whether you're a costumer, whether you're a writer, whether you're an artist, whether you're a performer, whether you're simply a person who exercises that imagination that the good Lord gave to every single one of us to dream up these worlds and to share them with everyone else. We have the most creative, the most inventive people on the face of the earth. This is something to be very, very damn proud of. But unfortunately, in the eyes of the general public, they're still fixated some 20 years ago on those very, very early images. Does furry fandom have adult art? Duh. Yes, we have our adult art. So do the Star Trek fans. So do the bronies. So, here is the problem we face. The media wants to do stories on furry fandom. Very, very often, they are going to be asking questions about that stuff. We find ourselves in a changing environment. Attitudes in furry fandom toward the media are evolving. Early on, we said, these people are out to crucify us. We do not want any media here at our convention. We discovered that that was not the best policy. For the longest time, I refused to talk to members of the media because I've got a professional reputation that I have to maintain. I am a well-known public figure in my hometown of Malvern, Pennsylvania. I am a borough official. I am a scientist. I am somebody that is what some people would call a pillar of the community. So I didn't want to have a microphone shoved in my face saying, so, tell us about this CSI episode.
He has done great work not only fostering good connections with the media, but informing people how to deal with situations they might find themselves in. In the more recent years, he has been trying to push a new notion to the fandom. Perhaps a better option than flat out ignoring the media and having them generate their own fodder is knowing who isn't immediately out to get us and showing them what we really are about. 25 million people. That is how many people saw the CSI episode. An episode that further propagated a misinformed image of furry fandom and planted this image into millions of heads. Furry fandom has had a bad reputation ever since the early 2000s that is built from misinformation and a fundamental misunderstanding. Anyone who says the furry fandom doesn't have adult aspects is kidding themselves. Even people like me who have literally no interest in that side. I'll even admit to the existence of the Mersuit subcommunity, but it is far from the fandom's central focus. The comparison I often make is general anime fandom, which is very much oriented around a style of art like furry. There have been so many misconceptions regarding furries. Some of the most damaging and obvious ones include furry fandom being centered around a fetish, all furries being zoophiles, all furries being plushophiles, all furries being zoophiles, and all furries believing they are an animal and not human. Even when you get past that, there is a huge misunderstanding of most furries owning fursuits, and things like most furries being gay. There is so many levels of misinformation that need to be peeled away if we ever want the greater public to understand the fandom. The ironic thing is, as I always love to point out, is that one of the biggest aspects of furry community is its diversity. Any blanket statement that goes beyond "we like anthropomorphism" is inherently flawed, and yet so many of the misconceptions try to blanket the fandom under one label. We have grown into a world where simple association with the fandom can ruin careers, from the burned furs to chamberlains, from chlorine con to kiwi farms. The proper internet fandom has become home to so much fur bashing that the fandom actually cultivated an isolated atmosphere for some of the furries. Furries need to be willing to reopen themselves to the media and the public, but take great care in who we get involved with. We also need people in the fandom who aren't afraid to step up and simply explain what the fandom is. If you have trouble talking to people, then share resources like this video. And I'm not just saying that for the clout. There were so many great resources out there, from the International Anthropomorphic Research Project to Uncle Kage to Joe Strike's Furry Nation, and Ash Coyote's magnificent documentary. I hope over time we can finally heal these 2-decade-old wounds and make the fandom a safer place to associate. A mix of early fandom mistakes and ongoing media sensationalism caused so many issues for furry fandom that still echo 20 years later. In recent years, our portrayal by the media has been steadily improving, but there still is a long way to go. Thank you everyone who has made it through this video, whether you're a furry or not. Links to everything is in the description, and until next time when we talk about the internet age of the fandom, stay tuned.